Sanbonani Bafundi. Here I'm continuing with this blue suit of mine. We're going to do the sleeves today. And I'm just going to quickly take you through the pattern. Here it's the top sleeve, and you know my story by now. Fagimalizobona. Here I just fused. We're not going to do working cuffs. We're just going to do the fake cuffs, the fake buttons for this chap. So yeah, it's going to be a lot easier, a lot faster. And of course, if I hadn't fused here, I would have herringbone stitched the Cilicia. For the lining, nothing too exciting. Obviously, I skipped the vent, and I would also do that if I was doing working button cuffs or working cuffs. Here, usually because this is a 5 centimeter turn, so theoretically I should also have my lining 5 centimeters shorter, but I'm always a bit paranoid here by the sleeves. So I made mine 4 centimeters shorter. And on the edges, I put maybe a little bit extra of lining. And then here on the top, a little bit extra, and especially here where it connects to the forearm, I'm going to put a little bit extra here. And we're going to see more about that in a second. One thing I just want to say about the bottom part, the cuff here. We can look here, this isn't the pattern I was using, but it's just an example. You'll often see with the patterns there's a bit of a corner there. And we can't really have a corner like that in our pattern. So you're intended to smooth that out, kind of draw it out in a neat curve. So you'll see here, this is not straight. This is in a curve. We take a straight thing there. You'll see this is in a bit of a curve. And this is just accommodating the shape of the hand. So we're going to be stretching this one out, but I'll get back to that in a minute. The other thing I want to say, this pattern again, it's not the one I use, but you can see it has a neat curve along the seams there. Usually myself, this portion here from the elbow down is reasonably straight, just the pattern that I use. And then here I curve it out. So that that's just my vibe. Just thought I'd mention that. Nothing too exciting happening there. So let's put that aside for a second. Undersleeve. So here, if we were doing the functioning button cuffs, I would include that portion of the vent, also 4 centimeters shorter. But here you can see the lining is much bigger. Blue on blue, I know is tough to see, but the lining is extended above the pattern piece. And the reason for that is just the construction. If we look, let's find a picture of a jacket. So if you look here, this is now going to be what what the jacket looks like, let's just say. And let's say we've sewn all of this together and we're putting our sleeve on. Here's going to be your stitch line, and then your sleeve's going to fall down there. Easy peasy. So the pattern of your sleeve is this sleeve plus your 1.5 centimeter seam allowance, which is what I have on my sleeve. There's the sleeve. Here's my stitch line. There's 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. Easy peasy. But now the lining, we can maybe, it's always tough to really illustrate this. We can maybe look on this one, because the lining, let's say, here's our stitch line for the sleeve, and there's the seam allowance. The lining has to come to the stitch line, so that's, we can say, like the shape of the final piece or the final garment. Then it has to come to the seam allowance, that 1.5. It has to come back down another 1.5, and then also has to curve up with its own seam allowance of 1.5. So it actually has, in addition to this extra 1.5 seam allowance of the sleeve pattern piece, it has an additional 1.5 turnaround. So there's an additional 3 centimeter seam allowance to accommodate that curve over there. So that's what I've done here, is just joining that 1.5. Now I am going to trim the seam allowance down, but for the actual joining, the math, the math has to math. And then of course, this, because it's now this curve, it can't really turn there without creating a drama. So this portion is just, you see, actually there's my pattern piece, and this portion is just brought a little further out so that this curve can fold easier down like that. And that's that. You see here, I usually make it about a centimeter where it connects to the front sleeve. And then here at the back, it's not a problem because this is on this side. So just make sure you do that for the lining of the undersleeve. Add that extra so it can curve around like so, like that, when we actually do the construction. So that out the way, let's bring the top sleeve back. Let's move this lining. Of course, here you can see I've just done tacks on the elbows. Now what we do need to do, here obviously because this is now a curve and it's going to flip up 5 centimeters, I need to actually curve that out so that it will curve and not, give me a drama here, this being 4 and that being 5 or something like this. A little bit of a risk doing it on a fuse, but I mean, whatever. I live on the edge. So I'm just going to start off. I like doing this together with the sleeves, or the two sleeves together. I don't like having one sleeve being a little bit different from the other. So I'm just going to wet that. Now here, of course, there's some layers with the fusing and the two sleeves. So I'm just going to make sure that it is nicely wet. Switch my iron on so long. So as you know, I'm really not a fan of stretching out the pattern. I feel it's a lot of work for very little result, and that over time, the garment itself is going to stretch out. The wool itself, just with the heat of your body and the movement and the moisture, it's going to stretch out. So I don't often do it, but on this sleeve, this is where I do. So here's nothing really to it. I'm just going to kind of pull that out as I go and just stretch this portion. I try not to go more than 5 centimeters because 5 centimeters is most my turner. So I don't want to stretch, I can say, this part of the sleeve. I only want to stretch this part that's going to turn up underneath. That's the piece. You see here we've got that bubble, and so when this curves over, it's going to give me 5 centimeters all around, and also that shape that I want. And of course, the pattern piece itself, the actual curve is more here on towards the forearm, kind of just above the thumb. So here at the vent, I don't need to curve that portion. I'm not going to circle there. Just going to be working here on the front portion. And now you do need to let this just chill and calm down. If you move it while it's still warm, it's just going to like jump back to its original shape. So I really just want this to calm down, cool down. It's good enough. I'm going to come back to it anyways. And then, the other, same here, we want this shape, as you can see on the sleeve, the shape has to curve around because the seam is here underneath, really for sake of fashion, nothing else. And, we don't want to have this corner showing up over there. And again, it's not really the whole sleeve that has to curve, it's really just this portion by the elbow that I'm going to curve out, or stretch out, I mean. With that. So yeah, stretching out for the chest, stretching out for the shoulder blades. I don't do any of it. I honestly, like I said, I don't feel it's really worth the amount of energy, and I feel it also damages the fabric a little bit, and that, like I said, it's going to happen naturally with the movement of your body. But here on the sleeve, this one reason is that we definitely are shifting the seam more towards the inside of the arm. So we really do need to do this stretch here, otherwise it is going to create a bit of a kink. And also this, now that I've stretched it out, move it around, it gets caught in that seam. So it actually locks that shape in. Whereas I feel like the shoulder blade, spending half an hour stretching that out, and then 2 minutes later it just goes back to its original form. Obviously, I'm exaggerating just to excuse the fact that I don't do it. Stop judging me. But here, here it's really locked in that shape. It's locked into the seam from the undersleeve. So there, I really do feel it's worth the amount of time that I'm going to put into it. So there's nothing really to it. Maybe I'll say here while we're working that generally, or that what I've seen out there in the dark beta is that people will first join this inside of the sleeve and then work separately on the bend, which I will just never get my head around. So I stretch this out now, and then I work on the bend portion. I work on the back portion of the sleeve. And then once that's done, I'll work on the inside seam, and then obviously I'll be joining to the jacket. So I think that's basically that. Nothing else too exciting will be occurring at this time. What I'll be doing then is sewing the obviously right sides together. I'm just going to use this as an example. Obviously, this will be my undersleeve, and I'll just stitch it around. And here, I'll use a 1 centimeter seam allowance here, and I will curve this. Really, there's absolutely no tension here, so making it a square, no one's going to die. But I feel it's good practice just to get used to curving this around. And in this case, I'm just doing a fake cuff. So I'm going to go all the way to the end. If I wasn't, I'd be going a little bit less so that we can form the opening vents and put the buttonholes, etc. But in this case, we're not doing that. So that's that. I'm going to join the sleeves. Then the one thing I do for the lining, and this is the secret of Benjamin. Here, on the both sides of the sleeve, the back seam and the front seam, I'll join about a hand. I'm a bit of a cowboy with these measurements. I'll join about a hand only of the lining. I will also do that for the sleeve if I'm doing a working buttonhole, but let me not distract you with that. For now, like my violin teacher says, don't question so deeply, just obey. So yeah, just about a hand. You're going to stitch just that and that of the lining. Let's go. And here I am back from the iron. Nothing too exciting has happened. I've just ironed the seam open. Here, just giving it a little bit of a notch so that I can have my bend like that. And you'll see if I have a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance, my tacks often show through on this side. I'm going to leave that for now because I want to be able to match my lining here. You'll see over here, just because I'm a madman and I do my seam allowances a little bit crazy, I just need to neaten up that little bit of insanity right there. So what I'm going to do now is put the fake buttons and buttonholes here. I have a more comprehensive video on that where we do the alteration here and shorten this. But I'll just take you through it anyway. We're going to turn 5 and then 4 centimeters from there is where the whole story starts. So basically 9 centimeters. We're going to make sure that that is perpendicular on the vent. Just going to double check these buttons, make sure that they are actually 1.5 centimeters wide. Especially with a horn, it can be 1.6. I think this is actually 1.6. Let's put 2 together and see if we get to 3, or if we get to 3 and a bit. We do get to 3 there. So, from here we have 1.5 centimeters. And I'm actually just going to make it, 1.6, just so that these aren't going to be too squashed on top of each other. And we're doing 4. And I'm going to make sure that this is all nice and straight, perpendicular on the vent and parallel to each other. From here, I measure 1.25 and then 2 centimeters long. I don't know why I do 1.25. I just started doing that years ago, and well, this bit, I'm not changing it now. So I'll just do my zigzags over there, and that's basically it for this step. The linings, you'll see I iron my seam allowance is open, and of course I'm going to be dealing with that insanity there by smoothing out all those transitions. And then here, this portion, just leaving open at the moment. Just have faith, it's going to be fashion. Let me cut that out. So the linings, I won't do anything more at this exact minute. I'll first finish up the sleeves, and then when I put it into the jacket. So let me go and do that, and then we'll continue from there. Here we have it. We've done the fake buttonholes there, and all I've done is iron this up at my 5 centimeters. Now, because I know that this is a curve, and I want to make it easier for this to curve, I'm cheating a little bit here, making it not 1000% straight. And then this under one, also just folding up, and you see I'm only ironing this portion. This I'll iron once I've joined that other side. So here, if it's not 10,000% gouache, it must be maybe 1 or 2 mils less, but definitely not more. So on this under one, I can just give a little bit of a notch and flip that around, and I'll just stitch that 1 centimeter seam allowance, leaving 1.5 centimeters free there. And here on the under one, we've done this letter edge so many times. Let's do it one more time. So let's see, there's our hem, there's our vent. So the hem I know is 5 centimeters, so I'll just draw that parallel. Here's my 5. The vent, I think it's 5.5, 5.5. Let me draw that up. 5.5. Here's my cross. I need to then be perpendicular with the hem. From the cross, perpendicular with the hem, there's my point. And then perpendicular with the vent. From the cross, perpendicular with the vent, there's my point. And join those two edges to this corner. So now, like I say, I cheated a little bit because this is actually 100% 9 degrees. So this should have actually been 100% straight line. But because I cheated there a little bit, it's not working out like that. But that is just going to make it a little bit easier for my hem to fold along there and actually not give me drama here. So I'm selecting to have drama there, not drama here. You don't have drama there, might have some drama here, drama, drama, drama. So I'm just going to join those two, stitch it up to there, and leave again maybe 1.5 centimeters open. And back from the iron, as you can see, just done the letter edge there, leaving about 1.5 centimeters. Done this regular one, leave about 1.5 centimeters. And this is why I like doing this piece first, because it just lets me see that everything is nice and neat and together. Just putting a pin there and checking it out this side. Does that look fresh? I have, done it where you do the four sleeve together first, but honestly, I just find this way so much simpler, and I know this way well, so it's difficult for me to now reprogram my brain unless there's a real reason. Like if I suddenly learn there's a definite advantage to doing it the other way. But at the moment, I'm just doing it like so. Got that together, and I'm just here going to give a very quick whip stitch by hand just to join these two together. So they're not going to move around later on. Obviously leaving this portion up, you see that's going to be my seam allowance for the lining. I'll just come in here. And here I'm just going to whip stitch these two together. Now my lining is going to come about 2.5 centimeters back from the edge of the hem there. So I don't want my whip stitch really to be further than that. But of course, the further down I go, the more secure this is going to be, and the less these two edges of the vent are going to spread apart like that. So, and also it's on the underside of the cuff. No one's ever going to see what's happening there. So I just fix that together. And this I won't even knot off. I'll just leave this edge chilling up here. And then I'll put my buttons on. Nothing too exciting. I don't think I'll make you hang around for this. What I'm going to do is just get my buttons out. I'm going to thread up a double. I don't think there's anything really exciting I can tell you at this time. Other than that, the one thing we need to look at is to make sure that the buttons that we put on now are not going to close off this seam allowance that we need for the lining. And obviously, because these buttons are not functional, we don't have to make them super strong, and I don't do fraps unless I'm doing stacked buttons. But this chap is a kissing button kind of chap, so I won't do fraps here at all. I'll just keep them completely flat. Actually, I'll start on this bottom one. Usually I start on the top one, not for any real reason. I'll start on this bottom one. Something I do is that I'll put a pin here to keep this vent from shifting about. And there's really nothing to it. I'm just going to come bottom left to top right so that I can get a diagonal. Then on the sleeve, I'm going to go right to left horizontally. Twists, top left to bottom right. Don't get caught on the needle, on the pin. Of course, yeah. So there's now, there you go. And then straight out. And like I say, you miss this portion. And then all I do is one additional stitch to, in a way, lock it over there. Up to the next edge. So I'll go into more detail with this on the video about altering a cuff. You can check that one out. I'm just going to do an additional stitch to lock it. And then I'm just going to carry on with my buttons. I don't think I will make you watch all of that. Nothing really exciting. Just going to continue with that. And then I'm done. Knotting that off. So from there, now I'm going to come over here and put my forearm together. Now the one thing that's important here is that because we stretched out the top sleeve, it's not going to match exactly because you don't know how much you stretched out. So you just have to kind of go with it. And the pattern is designed like that. The top sleeve is actually cut just a smidge shorter so that you're going to stretch it out and then it will match up. But at the end of the day, it's going to match where it matches. So match from the elbow. And like I was saying in the beginning, from the elbow downwards, in my style, it's reasonably straight. So there's not all that much stretching that I do. It's really on the elbow and above. So let's go all the way down to the hem. And there we are. Now the hem, no matter how well I design my patterns, always just needs a little bit of extra work. So my turn up is 5. I'm going to stitch my 1.5 from there, and then I'm just going to curve it out a little bit, just to make it easier for me to flip that up. So I'll go do that stitching, and then I haven't done anything too exciting. I just joined now this front arm, and I ironed up the rest of the hem. Sometimes here it really doesn't match exactly when I turn that hem up. I don't fight it. I just let it go where it wants to go because, you know, of all the bending and all of that. And here, again, because of all the bending and the stretching, it might not be 1000% exact. So I'm just going to trim that down. Perfection. So from here, I'm going to now put my gather stitch, and I gather this entire front portion from here all the way to the seam, so the whole top of the arm. I'm just going to put my gather stitch just under 1 centimeter, maybe 8 mils, all the way around, quite a long stitch. Doing that as a gather, it really depends on the fabric, if I'm going to gather with a bit of a sleeve cap or not. In this case, because this is so incredibly thin, I am going to gather with the sleeve cap. So I'm going to just put a piece of bias over here, just to, any piece of the same fabric, cut on the bias, and I'll just stitch it on here and do the gather one time. So this bias piece, I'm not too fast. All it is a piece that's cut on the bias, and I just stretch out that top portion and shrink in this under portion. Just want to check more or less where is it going to get me. Right there. That's going to be fine. Just want it more or less around the cap of the sleeve. This is not really giving us the sleeve cap. It's actually just kind of giving me some stability on this very thin fabric. So after I've done this, I'll look at what I do for the sleeve cap. But first, I'm just going to do a very plain gather and stitch that, or base that, into the jacket, and then from there decide what we're going to do next. So here the real fun begins. You can see there I just stitched that piece of bias there, and I'm just going to give this a pull. For me, it's kind of just an eternal gamble. I like to base this and then fit with the client. Right now we're in a bit of a time crunch with this chap. He's going overseas. So I need to finish it today without the extra fitting. So yeah, usually I'd like to fit this and then determine what kind of sleeve cap we're going to give him. But this is just the life of fashion. So how I do, I gather it up to the max, and then I loosen it out. Here, right at the top, you want hardly any gather there, because this already is on a curve and it's going to be turning, so there's a lot of gather there. So we want hardly any gather. The rest, it's, depending on the style, how much of a gather we're going to do. Obviously, the more the gather, the bigger the arm and the more flexible it's going to be. But you don't want to have it too much. Well, depending on the style, of course. If you're going to put a beautiful rope in there and have a nice bubble, I think it's called a chondrolino, or something like this. Then, of course, you need quite a bit of gather, but for our purposes, not so much of a gather. That I think is okay. It's really tough to give an explanation just from doing it thousands of times. I've gotten used to what it should look like, more or less. And yeah, I'm going to fit this and then baste it and then check. It's really the only way to actually know. This sleeve pattern just has a center top mark. And I'm just going to fit that there. Now I am going to baste just on the fabric, skipping out the horsehair and the shoulder pad, because this is what I'm going to do eventually, so I may as well get around to it now. So basically I'm just shifting around, and you see so here's the shape of your sleeve hole and the shape of your sleeve, and as I'm pushing it around it creates that gather. So I'll start by just doing that amount of gather. I won't force any more gather in there. And I'll just go all the way around. Now on this particular pattern that I'm using, I know that the front seam of the suit, of the jacket, and this front seam of the sleeve are quite close together. Obviously not touching, they're about a centimeter apart. So if that happens down here, I know things are looking up. I'm going to do just to the front seam of the sleeve there, and then come to the back, do the same story. Just go around letting it gather as it wants to gather to the back seam of the sleeve. So from here, again, depending on your style, you don't really want all that much gather along the underarm. Obviously, if you have gather there, it's going to give you more reach, more stretch, but it's going to give you a bigger sleeve. And you see, this one, if I just kind of pace it out, I do have that bit of extra, maybe, I don't know, about 4 centimeters extra. So I'll then go and undo these pins. So I like to put a very, very, very slight amount of gather on the underarm, but most of it to be taken up in the rest of the sleeve. So here I come again, and this time I'm going to just put a fraction of gather as I go around. There are patterns, of course, that have more match points, the front pitch and the back pitch, etc. This pattern doesn't, so you have to just be strong emotionally. The reason I use this pattern is just because it's the most accurate that I've come across so far. The woman I studied with in Germany, oh, what an intelligent woman. She's taken a few different patterning systems and combined the advantages of each to come up with her own system that she taught me, which is, yeah, like I say, it's the most accurate one. There are some challenges, like here, where you don't have as many notches, but also the speed of the pattern itself, not the fastest I've seen, but the fastest that is still accurate. I've seen faster methods that are like just hopelessly inaccurate. So anyway, that's why I use her system, because it is genius. Now, of course, I could also just pull on that gather stitch a little bit to take up all the gather. There's no real right or wrong way. I'm just kind of going with what the sleeve wants to do. So now I've got basically front and back done. Checking out this under. I mean, I could gather that in. Let me just see. If I were to gather that in, what my result be? No, too much gathering. So I would have to go all the way back, eat my words, cry my tears, take the sleeve out, and yeah, give this a little bit more of a gather. Again, really hard to say what is too much and what is too little. This is really veering on the edge of too much. Let's check this out. Also, though I'm doing it here, is I'm working on the inside, meaning that automatically my sleeve is getting kind of crunched, or scrunched into the armhole, because the armhole is now inside out. So when I turn it around, a lot of that ease will be taken up just by the armhole going into its natural shape. That's the back half done. Let's see what the front half is doing. You know, really, whenever I do a sleeve, sure, like the whole flippin' suit, whenever I do it, I just prepare emotionally to do each job a few times, because that's just the way I prepare my unpicker, knowing that I will be unpicking and redoing a couple of times before it is perfect enough. Each time the seam is moving a little bit further up, which is fine. I just don't want it to get too out of control. Maybe 2 centimeters is kind of as far as I want that seam to be away from the underseam or the front side. Okay, this is looking more or less reasonable. If I do just a slight gather on this under part of the sleeve, one, just to give a bit of movement and ease, and two, because this armhole is inside out. So when we turn it, it's going to just increase a little bit. Looks like I need even less of a gather here down the bottom. Okay, I can tolerate that. So what I did forget to do, which I like to do before I do this, is mark out my 1.5 centimeter seam allowance, because I am going to do this by hand. I'm just going to do a baste and then just check on the mannequin and see, or with the client preferably, is it fashion enough? So I'm just going to go ahead, I'm marking that, and then I'm just going to do a quick baste. So I basted that, checked it on the mannequin, happy with how it's falling, and then I went through a bit of trial and error deciding what kind of fish I'm going to put in here. I tried these ones that I buy commercially, and it was just not going to work. So at the end of the day, I took my pattern and just did this shape on it. This actually usually works out for me. And then here where it goes into the back part of the sleeve, I just extend that like so. And that I think is going to give me a good amount together. You see, you can kind of see the seam allowance there. So I'm just going to layer this because I've got a lot of seams ending there in one spot. So I'm just going to layer that a little bit. This one of the gather, or this one of the bias, I'll trim down quite a bit. And then this one of the fish, I'll also trim down a little bit. So now I'm actually going to undo this basting. I don't stitch over the basting because I don't like to live with tears. What I'm going to do before I do that is just transfer these notches. And I'm going to transfer them actually in the same way that the seam is going. So you see there's my front side seam. I'm just going to notch also in that direction. Might be crazy, that's just how I do it. Same at the back here. This one is usually a bit of a step for me. You can see, where is it now? Here it is. See there's a bit of a step there where the seam allowances didn't match. So I'm just going to cut it on that step, like so. And I'll transfer this to the other sleeve then and know how to match that sleeve. So I'm going to pull out this basting, then I'm going to stitch this. Oh, I forgot that I did this a little bit weird. I'm going to stitch this with quite a long stitch, one time over all of the pins. I'm going to pin this like an insane person. Also, I need to cut the second one of that. Yeah, so I'm going to pin it, stitch over the pins with quite a long stitch. Then we're going to give it an iron and do some shrinking before we stitch it again, also with a long stitch, but just to smooth out everything and catch any stitches that went awry. So that is what's going to happen now. Right, so I've gone over this once, and the first thing is you just check everywhere that you don't have a pleat somewhere. You see I've got a little pleat right over there. So I'm going to redo that section. Also know that you probably busted your needle, so either sharpen your needle or replace it. And then you see all of this waviness. I'm going to go around, wet that, and then just shrink it in. Then we're going to stitch one more time around. And you'll see, my old machine used to do it a lot. This one, not so much. But if I stitch over you see there, if I stitch over pins, it tends to break the thread here and there. So we have to go again. And also with the pins, it's quite jagged. So we're going to go and just smooth that all out after we've shrunk that in, and of course after I've fixed that. There, I've done all of that. I've stitched around again, and I've also gone over and ironed again, trying to just get rid of as much of this excess as I can. From here, we're going to hold this up and missing the lining, I want to now, in a way, baste the jacket back onto the horsehair. Because remember, the horsehair is only attached, with these threads, and then there was another one on the edge here, keeping it in place, which I then took off so that I could stitch the sleeve. And just to be clear, the sleeve is then only sewn onto the fabric of the jacket, not onto the horsehair at all. Here at the back, there is a little strip of horsehair just here to give strength to this back portion, especially such a thin fabric. But, and that one is stitched the whole way through. But there in the front, not. So this you just want to stitch reasonably close to the seam. And you're going to go from the center in both directions. So one of them is going to be a bit of a crazy backstitch each time. And you're just going to make sure that your seam allowance is flipped in the right way and catch that onto your canvas. It's really nothing too exciting about this. Just moving around, making sure my seam allowances are all pointing in the right direction, and just doing a stitch so that the horsehair and the jacket, which now includes the sleeve, are not going to move around too much. I want it to be back onto, well, back together. Now, of course, all the other basting is going to help keep it in place, which is great. Here you just want sufficient basting right by the seam so that it's not going to shift around on you. Then you're going to go to the inside and from the sleeve side, we're going to stitch around. This is not permanent. And now really join that horsehair onto the lining. So onto the jacket here at the armhole. So here I want to be really as close to my machine stitching as I feel is safe. I can also, with my fingers, just pull this a little bit so it's in a way stretching over the horsehair. And I am doing a back stitch because there is a little bit of movement in that, and it's quite secure. It's not like a running stitch that's going to end up pulling funny somewhere. Making sure I don't over tighten here. And then I'll just move around like that the whole way around wherever the horsehair is on this armhole. I'll just be going all the way around and then attaching that. So this is obviously going to be now permanent. And this is one of the spots where the horsehair is going to be attached to the garment. The other one is the shoulder. Then you have break line and underneath the lapel. And you've got the armhole here. And I also, as you know, do a bit of a loose stitch behind the dart. And then of course my pockets are stitched straight through. So obviously on the pockets it's also joined. But otherwise it's loose. It's the floating canvas, which gives much more movement because the layers are not glued together. It's a lot more fluid, a lot of movement can happen, a lot more breathable, a lot more fashionable, and a lot more time consuming. So where was I? I was about here. Of course, once I get past a certain point on the shoulder, it's just the shoulder pad. I stitch the shoulder pad as well. Even here in the front where it's horsehair and shoulder pad, I stitch all the way through the shoulder pad. Here at the back, I'm coming all the way through the shoulder pad to the end. And here you can see that strip of horsehair, but here it's stitched through the horsehair because the horsehair is acting like a stabilizer. Depending on how much gather you have and the fabric that you're working with, you've got to stabilize that back portion. Otherwise, it's just not strong enough to handle a heavy sleeve. So once I've got that done, of course double checking that everything is fashionable, I'm just going to reduce some of this bulk. You see, I really don't like that corner. And I absolutely love the scissor. It has a serrated edge on the bottom, which, trying to see which layer is going to be going through. It really helps to grip the fabric as you're working on it. So I like to do this layering after I've joined everything because it helps it just to hold everything in place. So that is the main thing to discuss, is joining there. And that's how you then join the canvas onto the jacket and the armhole. Now from here, putting the lining, the traditional way is to attach it by hand because you would have already attached it onto the sleeve and joined the seam allowance on the front arm there. I'm going to show you my secret way of secrets. Now, I don't know if I want to just take that seam allowance down a little bit. Just maybe trim it like this, just where this what is this shoulder pad is. It's just a little bit of a corner there. I just want it to be less of a corner. Sometimes I'll do this with a zigzag scissor because that also helps you get a softer fold there. Yeah, much better. Of course, I'll do that on the other side. But what we'll do now is join the sleeve, or the sleeve lining. So here you've got to determine which sleeve lining to use. And of course, we didn't cover this, but sleeve lining as well. I need to fix up my ghetto seam allowancing. Sort that out. I think we did cover this. I just only did it on one sleeve. Sure, that is quite hectic. Benjamin of the past, madman. Yeah, so this is the sleeve we're using, am I right? Yes, there's the front. And I want to attach this onto the lining. And this I'll do through the center back, which I've left open. So I'll just match my center there. Now, here I'm going to more or less follow the same notching that I had on the sleeves, because I do want the lining of the sleeve and the sleeve itself to be reasonably together. So I know that this one is about 2 centimeters from the front seam. This you usually have to kind of turn around again so that you can get the right sides together easily. Right, doing something. It's not what I meant to do. That's what I meant to do. Yes, this can be a bit fiddly. I usually do one at a time, just because it's so fiddly, and also on such a soft fabric, a little bit nervous that I'm going to lose a pin in here somewhere. You know, the pins like to slip out of soft fabric. So I'd rather just do one at a time to avoid that drama. So, yeah, this is really nothing groundbreaking. I'm just going to pop over to the machine and join this together. You know, you see same story here underneath, not really a gather, and the cap, gather, and that's it. So I'm going to join that, obviously join the other sides, etc. We'll be back. And now, may the secret finally be revealed. How we're going to do is turn this around. And now, because this is still opened up, we're going to be able to squeeze the entire armhole through there. I'm going to line up. I just want to search for the seam. There it is. I'm going to line up my shoulder seam. And I want to line up the body parts. So I'm not going to be too concerned about where the sleeve matches, but the front, your front side must connect to the front side. There it is. And the back side seam must connect to the back side seam. And there it is. And here's this one. There it is. There. Can get a little bit disorientating. Of course, where is this thing? There it is. And there's that one. Okay, fine. Let's, yeah, more or less. Here it is. So those are my match points. Just going to kind of squeeze everything else around it like that. Now this, as you can see, it's a bit of an interesting warp, and you can only really do this with the horsehair. If you fuse, this is just not going to work. This is a little bit further up. I guess so. I'm just going to move around, locking this into place. And from there, easy peasy, if I can find a needle, we're just going to go around again by hand and do, I like to do a back stitch. Same story as with the horsehair. It is relatively secure, but also has just a little bit of movement. This one we're going to give quite a bit more movement because we want to have quite an easy move here on the arm. So I'm not going to stitch very close to the stitch line, maybe in the middle between stitch line and seam allowance. And every stitch, almost like a tailor's tack, I'm just going to leave just a little bit of a bubble. It's a bit extreme. So that this is now caught here, stabilized exactly where I want it to be. Still has movement, so it's not going to restrict me anywhere. And that's how I do my sleeves, the lining of my sleeves. Now you know the secret. So I'm just going to go ahead and do all of that. Once you've secured your lining there, it's quite easy to just slip this up and then you'll be able to stitch the rest of the sleeve lining. I'm going to leave a hole there. I do it in the front, you can do it in the back, do whatever you like, so that I can do my cuff. Now, before I carry on, what we've got to do is match up the elbows. So I'm just finding my bar tacks there. Is this the front? Yes. And I'm going to match that. Before I do anything, I'm just going to pin it and see if it's going to sabotage me or not. So I'm just joining there, front, back, and then you just give it a bit of a hang. You know, I'll put it on the mannequin, you can just hold it up, whatever, to make sure that the lining is not now going to pull your sleeve in some funny way. If not, you can give that a nice stitch. I do it with quite a nice loose one, same as how I joined it up here. And then if you see there, I can see already there, it's too tight there. Even though I had all that extra seam allowance up here, it's too tight, I can see that already. So that means I will bring it a little bit further down before even heading over to the mannequin. Let's see, let's try maybe 2 centimeters. That looks a bit better. And then of course, you know, it's going to be a little bit out of whack here at the cuff, but I'm sure I can deal with it. I'll check the other side. Then of course, once you've done that, flip it over here. You know, I'll cut this gouache so that it's not poking out. I'll squeeze in here, and same way as I did with the alteration, just stitch it along there, and also using that as the seam allowance. You can go check out that video to see how I did that, and then also herringbone stitch.